Early access patch number 2 is right around the corner, and as far as we know, the patch is mainly a quality of life patch, bringing some features such as respecking. But Thomas has been active on Twitter trying to put out some feelers, I guess, on some enhancements to the combat systems that they have in place currently. That got me thinking of a few things about the game's builds and combat in general that I think could use some tweaks or maybe some new implementations to keep things feeling fresh. I just want to emphasize that these are mainly my opinions on a few changes that the game could use that I think will provide a longer term, healthier experience for players. The first few items on this list are going to revolve around the enchantment system. The first item on this list that I'm going to have is new interactive negative curses for your gear. Current negative curses are sometimes extremely punishing and aren't exactly the most interesting or interactive. They are just passive effects that are always active at all times, and they range from being a non-issue to completely bricking an item due to how negative the effects are. In my opinion, curses shouldn't immediately brick an item due to how negative or punishing it is, nor should it be a complete non-issue. Just as a couple examples, a non-issue curse is halved durability because, well, we just don't really care about it that much in the middle of combat. Another one might be experience decreased, but we don't really care about that when we're max level, stuff like that. I know the experience gain is going to be relevant when we aren't max level 30, but you get my point. On the opposite side, stamina reduction on damage taken is an example of a curse that just completely bricks an item due to just how punishing this is. Basically, stamina can go negative, and so if you take damage, it's going to put you in the negative, meaning you can't use your dodge roll or anything like that, and it's just going to mean that you're going to take follow-up damage because, again, you're not able to parry, you're not able to block, you're not able to dodge roll, and essentially you're just being stun locked in place. Some of the more manageable curses that still feel like they have a bit of an impact are going to be things like damage taken increased or perhaps reduced health, because you can still deal with them simply by playing well, and it doesn't completely brick your build. I would like to see some negative curses that force players to deal with these curses under certain triggers. As a couple of examples, maybe if I take damage, there's a chance that my overall speed is going to be reduced for a set amount of time, or perhaps when I take damage, there's a chance of calling down a lightning strike on my location that can damage me, the player. Either way, these curses aren't always going to be active and hinder me, and when they do become active, it forces me to take some sort of action to resolve the curse. Number 2 on this list is going to be new positive enchantments that amplify certain builds. Now, I understand that many positive enchantments aren't working right now, but even if they were, only a few enchantments really feel like they would be super impactful, such as maybe attack speed, but we all know that focus gain and just focus enchantments in general are very strong right now. I think it would be nice to see more enchantments that directly affect certain builds, and I understand that this might be a little bit of a risk of muddying the water a little bit of the enchantment pool, but I think it would just be a little bit more interesting to try to build around certain things and chase certain items. Now, I know that some of these effects might be introduced in something like a roguelike for the Crucible that they're planning on implementing at some point, but a couple example enchantments that could be added are something like when an enemy is burning, they have a chance to flare up and explode with fire damage, which could play into a fire status ailment effect build. Or when using a charge attack, maybe it ignores an enemy's armor, or it applies like a bleed effect that can do damage over time. Just something that amplifies your charge attacks to make your build more of a charge attack oriented build. And number 3 on this list is the final enchantment specific change that I would like to see, and that's Enchantment Rerolls. The gear we get is already random from the base stats that they're assigned, to the rarity that you get when you enchant the item, to the actual enchantment's strength when you are actually enchanting the item. So there's just a lot of RNG systems in place. I think it would be nice if we had the option to select a single enchantment on a piece of gear and re-roll it. The reroll attempts would be unlimited, but it increases in gold cost or something, whatever currency that they want to implement with each reroll attempt. Assuming they use gold as the currency for your rerolls, this would help smooth out the RNG while also giving us an extra reason to use gold, so essentially just a gold sink. The next few items on this list deal with armor balancing and weight classes, and number 4 is going to be weight class rebalancing. Right now, it feels like the pros and cons for all 3 weight classes are just a little imbalanced. The lightweight class offers very little armor, so that's its negative, but it has the fastest dodge and it costs less stamina, and it also has a faster run speed. The problem is there doesn't seem to be a real incentive to go for this weight class because you're going to be very squishy, and that mostly outweighs the biggest pros. Normal weight class is a pretty good balance, I think. You can get a decent amount of armor to mitigate quite a bit of damage while still having a respectable roll. Heavy armor is likely going to give you the biggest bang for your buck because you're going to be all in plate gear, so that means you're going to have a very high damage mitigation cap, but you will be doing a slow roll that is going to cost a lot of stamina. But there's another issue that we'll touch on a little bit later that kind of mitigates this con for heavy armor. Another one of the perks that you get with heavy armor is that you can do a shoulder bash, which does a ton of stagger damage. But ultimately, I think my biggest issue with the weight classes right now is that people aren't investing a ton of stat points into equip load, and they're just opting to go for a heavy build, and then they're not really interacting with the pros and cons, I guess, of that heavy equip load, and they're just simply using it to get just an absurd amount of armor and damage mitigation and poise, and I think it kind of just breaks the balance a little bit, I guess, between the 3 weight classes. So ultimately, I think it would just be nice to see light, medium, and heavy have a little bit more defined positives. Like in Dark Souls, your light equip load, you just have more iframes. That's just an example. I don't think that's necessarily what should be implemented in No Rest for the Wicked, but I hope that you're kind of understanding the imbalance that's kind of going on right now. The 5th item on this list kind of plays into the heavy armor issue, and that's armor rebalancing. While we are only in the early stages of the game, we can currently mitigate a ton of damage, and you just do that by equipping plate armor. I think there's been some Reddit posts talking about the math behind the damage mitigation, and you can mitigate up to, I think, 67% of damage if you're at the armor cap. And this has resulted in some builds just completely ignoring attacks, and I understand that these builds are also kind of playing on or building off of that healing for percentage of damage dealt, but I think that armor is still a little bit of an issue. So I guess I would like to see the top end of armor, of plate armor and stuff like that, brought down a little bit, and the floor, so like your light armors and stuff like that, the damage mitigation of that brought up slightly. And the final thing that I can help with weight class rebalancing is actually adjusting a rune attack. Blink is a movement utility rune that is very cheap. It has a base cost of 25 focus, and when you combo it with the gem that refunds focus on focus use, this rune just becomes totally insane and is incredibly focus efficient. And what's even worse is Blink has no weight restrictions, meaning heavyweight builds can completely bypass their slow movement by taking this rune. To build again off of that uniqueness of the different weight classes, I believe Blink needs to be redesigned with weight in mind. After all, you'd think that it would take more energy to move something that weighs more. So perhaps the focus cost can be dynamic based on your equip load. These numbers would just be an example, but maybe if you're using a light equip load, focus cost for Blink becomes 25, that's its current cost. A medium equip load costs 50, and finally a heavy equip load is 75 focus. I think that this would serve as an incentive to go with a light, highly mobile Blink build, but I'm curious to see what you guys think about this suggestion. Number 7 is that focus needs to change to emphasize basic attacks as the core source of focus regen. I see 2 crowds when this topic comes up. The first is those who want to play the game like Diablo, where they can just spam focus attacks, and the other crowd is those who want to play the game a little bit more reserved and strategically. Personally, I'm in the latter crowd and would like to see combat slowed down a little bit. As a result, I think focus needs to be redesigned to emphasize normal attacks that generate a ton of focus, rather than allowing focus attacks to generate focus and create this infinite loop that we currently see. I agree with everyone when you say that it feels good to be overpowered and spam our focus abilities, but I think that feeling is only short term. I think it starts to feel a little ridiculous and quite frankly a bit boring when you just walk into a room, spam your rune attacks, completely wipe out the area, and just move on to the next one without really a second thought. For me personally, I think my main issues with this focus spam meta is that it feels like I'm not really interacting with my weapon or enemies. I really want my weapon's basic attacks and moveset to matter. What was the point of having the devs create all of these unique animations for all these different weapons if we only spam rune attacks? I want my build to be defined by the weapon I'm using instead of the runes that I have equipped. So long story short, I think focus abilities should be complementary to the weapon that we're using and not build defining. Number 8 on this list is gem rerolls. This is going to be a short one, but gems have a pretty wide range that they can roll, and it feels pretty bad when you get that perfect weapon only to have the gem roll low without a chance to gamble again. Similar to enchants, gems are already a little RNG to acquire, and they already have the RNG of how high and low they can roll. Let's just please not lock players out from trying to gamble again on their gems. I would imagine that this once again could be some sort of gold sync where you pay to have the gem removed and then insert another gem to try to either high roll it, or you can just try out different build options. Like let's say I'm using the Spirit Edge and I want to try out just adding a little bit more cold damage versus just damage increase. This just reroll system would enable more flexibility to our builds, I think. The last item on this list is number 9, and that's enemies could be a little bit smarter about ranged combat. Right now, ranged combat feels very strong in No Rest for the Wicked. Enemies aren't exactly the most intelligent when it comes to avoiding these ranged attacks, and instead they tend to just stand there and just take arrows or something, magic shots, whatever, and they just walk towards you, meaning that if you just slap on a rune like Blink to your bow, you can dodge around forever and just keep shooting the enemy from a distance, and these enemies just have to accept their fate. I think it would be nice to see some enemies react a little bit more in ranged combat. Like as an example, there are those Nith enemies who are reactive to melee attacks, albeit maybe a little too aggressively reactive sometimes. But essentially, I think if you make enemies roll sometimes to range attacks, it would at least make it feel a little bit more engaging, and it might make you second guess when you can actually attack and stuff like that. But that's going to be it for these 9 changes that I think could really benefit No Rest for the Wicked. I know this got a little bit long-winded, so if you're watching at this point, I appreciate you watching all the way through. If you like this type of video, consider subscribing to the channel to help support this small channel of mine. What kind of changes would you like to see come to No Rest for the Wicked? Let me know down in the comments below. But this is GooberTroy saying thank you for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video.